Today, we're talking about plyos. Woo! So, that's what we're talking about. Yeah! Okay, so, plyos, biggest thing is, again, I want everybody to understand one big thing about it, is that they are normally meant for explosive exercises. That is the whole idea. And anything you look at from a purely research or academic perspective, like books, official strength conditioning books, charts, research, etc., will only be looking at a super small percentage of plyos. So the way plyos actually work in real life, or the way we use them, is not even glossed over when it comes to a lot of the academic stuff. So, now actually going into that, how does that work? What does that mean? So, plyos are just an easy way to group explosive exercises that I typically make up, for example, like jumps and throws are the two biggest categories by far. It can also involve some track drills. It can also involve, explosive push-ups. But literally any explosive exercises is in a way technically plyometric. But so the way we talk about it when it comes to workouts, we're basically talking usually jumps, throws, explosive push-ups. That's the vast majority of them. So I had to throw that first part in there because, for example, if you do come from any form of exercise physiology background, if you read strength and conditioning research in general, you're going to see the really, really technical definition of plyometrics. So I do feel like we need to just cover that real quick. Basically, we're looking at an exercise that, because of how it's explosive, it finds a way to store or create a higher degree of natural energy, basically through a quick either pre-stretch or through a pre-stretch with extra loading on it. Like, for example, dipping down for a squat jump or landing from a height to go into another jump. That quick energy that gets stored from landing, taking that and teaching people how to transfer that into actual greater energy than they would be able to create on just their own. So it's all about being using natural physics present in your body and the muscles and tendons to create a higher degree of muscular force than you could on your own. That's it. So people take it, like I said, the research community takes it way too far in terms of how specific it needs to get. Because, for example, what are we talking about with plyometrics? Or what's everyday usage of plyometrics? Literally running is a plyometric. Every single time your foot hits the ground when you're running is a plyometric. Every time you do it when you're sprinting is thus a more intense plyometric than when you're just running. But every time that foot hits the ground, it is absorbing force from hitting the ground. The muscles and the tendons are absorbing force fighting the stretch, and you have X amount of time, a very short amount of time, to use that stretch to help you go into the next run even better. That's why once you're running, continuing running is faster than stopping and then trying to start again. So it's always getting that extra effort. That's also why anything that decreases the amount of force or input that you have on something like running decreases the power you have. So running on grass, or say really soft turf, is slower than running on hard track or pavement or something like that, because it's softer, it has more give, and so you can push against it less. It's hard, you get less for pushing out against it. Even more so, try running on sand, and super hard to push force through that. So plyos are all about getting people, getting athletes. We're talking about performance most of this. It's all about getting people to be able to get as much power from the movement as they can. To jump higher, run faster, change directions faster, throw faster, push faster, pull harder. Literally, it works for any general motion when you're doing it. So, performance, but then also health are the two main reasons that we really want to focus on plyos. Like I said, it is impossible to achieve peak performance for any athlete that involves anywhere on the power spectrum without doing some plyometric training. I'm just going to throw that out there. They can't. They can do really well. They can win all the time. But any athlete who does not do plyometrics, I'm 100% convinced, would put my entire house on it, could do better if they incorporated plyometric training. From there, the other part is it can also be used for endurance, because like I said, there is a measure of that. But for us, the most important part, other than just purely the explosive performance, is going to be the health aspects of it. Because like we actually talked about in the last meeting, when it comes to injuries, the greatest injuries happen at like in the very first moments of an action in sports or movement, and usually from a very, very quick impact. So like most lower body injuries happen within the first 150 milliseconds of a foot hitting the ground when you're running, or a foot hitting the ground when you're changing direction, or a foot hitting the ground when you're landing from a jump. Like that's when most injuries happen. And or like if you're sprinting, for example, most injuries happen when you're actually trying to decelerate, not when you're running full speed. Like if it was purely because of like say intensity, it would seem that sprinting and full speed would be when the injuries happen. But instead they actually happen the most when you're decelerating and trying to slow down. And yeah, it's because every single time that foot hits the ground and it's absorbing, it is in essence going through a plyometric to try to resist it quickly. So the better athletes get at plyometrics, the more trained they get with it, not only do they get better performance out of it for power output, but they're actually better equipped to be able to prevent injuries. So, now, I can never bring myself, no matter like who I'm talking to, what I'm talking about, to ever say like actually prevent injuries, because it's just a roll of the dice at the end of the day to some degree, but at least minimize it substantially or get them back faster. So when it comes to plyometrics, we want to make sure that we're taking performance and injury prevention as our two main keys in here. Or if it's somebody who could help endurance-wise, putting that in here. So, looking at it, if we're looking for power, which is what most of the time we're doing with plyometric training, we want to make thing about power output is it has to be as explosive as the athlete can make it. It can't this is a type of training that you absolutely cannot get away with just doing reps. So if you're whether it's a squat jump, whether it's a medicine ball throw, whenever you're doing it for power, you have to be at least 90% or more of your power output every rep. I don't mean necessarily like peak power output, I don't mean that, but you have to give at least 90% of your maximum effort to a rep and to an exercise to have it actually make a difference and help you improve your power output. Anything less than 90% of what you're capable of, it will not accomplish anything. And if you do it enough times slowly, it could actually make you slower and less explosive. So I said, this is definitely a case. I'm a big believer that you don't do reps for reps' sake anyway. But this is even more so a case where you really it's not about going through reps. And luckily for us, this is one of those things where realistically, when actually being applied to training, it's very, very visual if you're just looking for it or trained to look for it. It's not one of these things where, as researchers would have you believe, it has to be measured or you need force plates, etc., stuff like that, because they're only looking at peak power as an energy output. You can see when someone's being more explosive or not. And I don't know if you guys how often you might pay attention to it. One of the main things I try to tell athletes whenever they're doing those exercises is they should always be pushing harder. They should always be pushing faster the whole time. It should be all about acceleration. Again, not just moving quick, but accelerating. That's more important. And they should actually feel like they're moving at their absolute fastest at that point of release. So, if it's a jump, it shouldn't look like they slowed down because they're about to make the jump. They should be actually driving through and exerting their highest amount of effort to try to be as fast as possible, right at the point they're leaving the ground. Same thing with the throw, for example. They should be looking like they're hitting that 100% mark through the throw as the ball or the medicine ball, whatever it is actually leaving, not early. There shouldn't be. If there's a point in pulling back, then the plyo is not actually happening correctly. It needs to be accelerating as much as possible through it. Now, how, again, like the actual speed itself, that's way more open to interpretation for what you're going for. Like, are you looking for acceleration against a really, really high resistance? That's gonna actually be relatively slow. But again, like, are they attempting to move as fast as possible? That's the important part. Or is it supposed to be a very light, like really fast exercise? Then don't make it harder than it needs to be. Like keep it lighter so they can really try to go full speed against it. So there's like so much broad range when it comes to plyometrics. Like one example that I was always trying to say, like really like actually visualize what it is you want to work for, and then actually have the training work towards that point. Like with Carly as an example, with her medicine ball throws that she's been working on for about like 3 months overall, but the last 2 months specifically, I've actually from the beginning of that started her purposefully with a heavier medicine ball, and have actually been dropping the weight on purpose as it goes. I want her to, she's gonna be doing the lightest medicine ball right when season is about to start towards the end of this month, because I wanted her to be more and more focused on the pure speed of it right as she's getting up to season. Like I wanted her to keep working on that like power, the accelerating part of the strength, and just building up that base. But then right as it gets closer, she's actually going lighter with it so that she can just keep going as fast as she can, use that extra power that she's built up to throw the lighter weight even faster than if she had done the lighter one from the beginning. Like I said, so it doesn't always have to be like say heavier as you're going. It's all about getting just that maximum acceleration and actually going where you want to go. So does that make sense? Yeah. With that, now 2 other reasons we may want to use the plyos. One of them is endurance. So more of like a speed endurance, or like just an explosive endurance. So I want to look for more continuous reps, like higher reps. And again, if you, in this case, kind of when to do it, again, I kind of imagine when you want your athlete to actually be better at it. If you want your athlete to get a lot of speed and power out of it, even though it is like higher reps, and maybe say you're also like tracking rest periods, keeping it on the lower side of things, then, but you still want power and explosiveness, you're going to want it to be early in the workout still. Like that's still a key. But if you actually are not that's not your consideration right now, and you want it to be more of like an acceleration of effort, then there are moments you can have it be more like later on in the workout, or even at the end of the workout. I said there aren't a ton of those, but that is there. Like examples would be, say, like middle distance or longer distance runners or endurance athletes, because you could be training them for that like late kick at the end of the race. Again, it's like, you know, how well they can maintain a really high speed at the end of the race is going to come down to their overall conditioning and their endurance. But so if they train the attempt to get faster, even when they're even like later on in the workout, that can help them with the kick. Or another example would be like a wrestler at the end of their match, because you know they don't get rest. I don't know if you guys like how many of you guys paid attention. You don't really get rest periods in wrestling. It's like even when a period is over, it's not like boxing where it's like, okay, 1 minute break. It's more like, okay, stand up, you're on the bottom, get set. Like all I do is change positions. And the wrestlers who need breaks will, you know, just take their time walking around and turning around. Like it's not like you get a minute break. So like I said, that's a great sport again for like a later on in the workout plyo phase at certain times, again, if you want to work that ability. So it's like basically you work them differently, whether you want to train the explosiveness at the beginning, that like peak explosiveness, or do you want to train that like attempt to be explosive, like maybe at the end when they're more tired. So I say like this is all a spectrum that you just need to constantly be targeting. And I'm going to keep saying that because again, anytime you look at like the official literature, the textbooks, They only talk about plyometrics as peak power because that's the easiest thing for them to measure. They're only concerned about what they can run experiments with and measure and say yes or no. And anybody who uses plyometrics for anything other than peak power is wrong. That is the official stance of official strength conditioning researchers, which honestly, even though coming from that background, I love it because it makes it that much easier to beat all other athletes and everything that they do, because that's not how real sports work. So again, so see what it is you actually want the athlete to be better at, and realize that the plyometrics are going to be a tool to get you there. So a third reason to use plyometrics, before we get into the more nitty-gritty of it, is muscle breakdown. Because since they are intense motions, using a quick stretch, a quick pre-stretch, and then the actual rep, they can dig into muscle fibers pretty quickly. In fact, they're a cheat code when it comes to activating muscle fibers. So, can anyone hook me up with something called Henneman's size principle?
Henneman's size principle. Larger muscle fibers recruited first.
Yes, but it's actually the other way around.
Oh, smaller fibers recruited first. Okay.
Yeah. So our bodies are made for being as amazing machines as they are. Our bodies are made to be lazy. In essence, they're intuitively want to do the least amount of work. They want to expend the least amount of energy possible. That's the better way to say it. Because they're thinking about conserving energy, survival, stuff that was really important, for thousands of years. So when it comes to anything we do, whether it's in the weight room with training, with a squat, with a push-up, or actually out on the field, like the basketball court or the football field, you name it, it wants to use the least amount of energy possible to do what we ask of it. So to do that, it's going to recruit the smallest muscle fibers, the smallest motor units first, and go from there, even if it's a max effort event. So it's going to try to find the most efficient way, utilizing the least amount of muscle energy possible. So even when we're lifting, we have to go through that. So even when you're doing a heavy squat, your body is actually utilizing its weaker motor units, its more endurance-based motor units first. It's just, the more you train, the better you get at activating your bigger, stronger motor units sooner. You're closing that gap. So that's Henneman's size principle. Plyometrics and Olympic lifts are the only two things that so far that have been found that can actually skip Henneman's size principle. Something about that quick, absorb that quick shock of landing into a fast stretch. And this is more exclusively for your more intense plyos, such as jumping between boxes, weighted jumps with a bar on your back, etc. But they actually help you skip that because there's such an impact that it immediately goes to your more active or to your stronger motor units and engages them instead of starting with your weaker, more endurance-based motor units. So I said, so it's a cheat code to actually engage those muscle fibers. Another place where that helps is in muscle breakdown. So if our goal is if our training goal is actually muscle breakdown, such as when somebody's trying to go into hypertrophy phase, someone's trying to work to gain muscle mass, whether it's gain muscle mass for athletics, or whether it's even just simply gain break muscles down to repair them for more aesthetic bodybuilding, fitness style reasons. If it's more for that, in either case, we want that muscle breakdown because then that's what with recovery and proper eating and all that stuff, that's what actually builds up to more muscle or better muscle. So in those cases, plyos can also be used for that. And it's it's not the only way to do it, but that's why some of those exercises here, like hypertrophy, for example, will have bigger complex movements like bench press or squat paired with squat jumps or push-ups. And at Philip Barber the other day, they just started this, they had squats immediately paired with knee tuck jumps, and then they had a barbell complex of step-ups and reverse lunges or something like that paired with split squat jumps. So those things are miserable, And again, like, this is where research is going to go, no, that's wrong. Your power output is going to suck because you're going from a big movement that exhausts a lot of your energy in muscle fibers and immediately going to a plyometric without the capability to be fast because you just put a lot of energy into a bigger lift. But again, by intending to be fast and trying to get everything you can out of it, even though it's not much, you get to activate those muscle fibers that you hadn't actually used up yet during the bigger strength movement. And like I said, because it's going to automatically help us activate the bigger muscle fibers that it can, it basically almost lets you finish off your muscles in that case, which is why you see so much failure in those workouts. But it's actually, it's nice, and man, I'm going deep into a tangent here, because failing through a plyometric with that it's way easier to recover from that type of muscular failure than like a squat to failure. Like, it just doesn't crush your nervous system as much or anything like that, because it didn't really overdo it. It just actually let us like finish drawing out everything that was left. So when you do that, so when muscle breakdown is your goal, you can get a much higher percentage of actually utilizing all your muscles by going from, or all your motor units and muscle fibers, by going from lift to plyos, lift to plyos, lift to plyos, like that. So like bench is my favorite example, especially because of like the leverage, because like your second set of, like if you do a set of bench and immediately go do push-ups, and then, you know, assuming you don't wait forever, like that second set of bench shows you how much harder it already is. It doesn't take much at all. Like, it's way more than simply like a recovery point from having done a hard set of bench when you follow it up with push-ups. And push-ups are a relatively easy plyo, you know, but it still gets that effect of that quick stretch and pushing right back up. So if you do something even more intense, like clap push-ups, even just speed push-ups off the ground, you're gonna get even more of that. So absolutely awesome tool for muscle breakdown. You just wanna make sure, again, like always pick what you're training for, because again, if your goal is to get an athlete more powerful, more explosive right before season, that's not gonna help them at all. Yeah, like to do it in the month before season because you're training in the wrong direction. But if this is 5, 6, 7, 8 months before season, and you're like really starting to build a new foundation, this can be huge to like really improve that muscle mass, get better at strength endurance, high speed endurance, and then build up from there. I said, because you got all the time in the world to be explosive if you're looking early off season. So it's like picking and choosing why you're using plyometrics. So I'll typically, I'll use them either in work, like with exercises, or even in circuits at the end of exercises, if it's like really early off-season type of training for athletes. But then most of the time, they're early on to focus more on power, speed, explosiveness. Does that make sense? I'm kind of going in a lot of places. Make sure that makes sense. Because I could sit here and talk about Golgi tendon, organs, and stretch shortening cycles, but I don't really care. Because if you do the plyo right, knowing those things doesn't matter. That's what's beautiful about actually being a coach or a trainer. Okay, so actual kind of progressions of plyos. So there's a lot of different ways to look at this, but I feel like the more you understand all of them, the better you can fine tune it. So one, I'll look at plyos as like just the type of exercise that it is. You never see this anywhere, but like, your most basic type of plyometric, as we call it, explosive exercise, wouldn't even be considered a plyometric by classical terms. But your most basic type of plyometric would be going from a relaxed position to an explosive concentric action, AKA a rep. So relaxed position to an explosive rep is your most basic type of like explosive exercise. So that is why so many athletes in like early programs that I've written or something like that, they start with like seated squat jumps, seated broad jumps, even seated box jumps, because there's no pre-stretch. There's no like you need to do this quickly and then go. It's you're relaxed, you're in a seated position, explode from there. Like that's it. Because that goes back to the original tenet that I mentioned, where the most important part is getting athletes to grasp the concept of accelerating. Like, we need you to accelerate. It's rate of force development. It's RFD. Again, it's not just simply jump, stand from here and jump up. It's trying to get them actually trying again to accelerate the whole drive, push harder and faster to actually jump as high as you can. Also a great time frame to fix any little mechanics, like a seated squat jump. They don't have to do much, and it's a great time to get them to learn how to not knock their knees together, to get them to learn how to actually like reach up on the jump and really use upper body momentum with it. It's a great time to get them to learn how to land softly so they absorb it. So not only do these early exercises of relaxed to explosive concentric help just teach accelerate, like be explosive with acceleration, they're great for teaching a lot of your early mechanics of plyometrics and explosive movement. So they're awesome for that. Also, as it turns out, when something is like concentric only, so when something is like only the rep, the muscle damage is very, very minimal. So the recovery time from that is like non-existent. Like, I can have somebody do like 100 seated squat jumps, and assuming it's not their like first 2 weeks of training, they would be fine the next day. Because again, there's just almost no muscle damage in that, because there's no like pre-stretch to go with it. So anyway, from there, the next one, don't do a ton of myself, but you very well could, would be simply moving from a relaxed position instead to an isometric hold, to an isometric position, to an explosive rep or explosive concentric. So do a little bit of this, but honestly just don't do a lot of it. But especially if somebody's, say, less developed, but you still want to go through like a very long-term progression, or you just want to like, you know, cross all your T's, dot all your I's, could definitely do it. So an example would be, like if we're using the seated squat jump again, from seated squat jump to now you're going to do a pause squat and jump from there. And just try to come straight up. So in a way, when we do triple extension jumps, you know, the very first one is dip, pause, then explode up. That's more of a technique thing, but that's another version. Or this could be great for teaching like explosive split squats. Is again, split squat, but then pause it for a second and then explode up from there. So going from an isometric in that. So again, because they are coming from muscular contraction, unlike when they were just sitting down on a chair, but it's still not like a big deal from that. From there is when your next step would be utilizing an actual pre-stretch to utilize that pre-stretch or that stretch shortening cycle, which, you know, is then just that quick natural stretch in the opposite direction, helps us create more stored energy. And as long as we actually turn around to use it as quick as we can, that extra energy we get for like in our muscles and tendons from stretching in one direction helps us then create more energy coming out of it. So this is the first one. This is the first type of the plyos that actually helps us create more power. That's why I said earlier, like the first couple don't even necessarily qualify as plyos. But if we just want to look at it like explosive from A to Z, like want to start with those and build up here. But so the pre-stretch is where we actually first get to develop that extra energy, and it helps us explode up. So again, that's why, like, you know, anytime you're jumping, unless you have like the most uncoordinated people in the world, tell anybody to jump as high as they can. They're going to dip down quickly before jumping upwards. You know what I'm saying? Like it's a natural part of how the body's built. After that, the next stage would be the higher impact plyos. You see these called shock plyometrics a lot too, although that means, again, usually more intense. But so impact can mean, this is a very broad range. It can mean anything from dropping off a very short box, like say 6 or 12 inches, to try to get a good quick jump out of that. It can be that. It could be, you know, catching like a heavier medicine ball or like something on your back, all the way to, you know, box like drops off of 36-inch boxes, or squat jumps with, you know, a barbell on your back, etc. So again, very, very broad range. Just like with so many other things, we want to start with the lighter, less intense, more basic part of it, and only move up as we feel like they're actually ready for it to go from there. It's like as people get more like with in-depth box jumps, for example, when people get a little bit more on the developed side, more like, okay, I feel like they're okay to kind of self-regulate or have general guidance, I will almost never put the heights on that. I let them go like kind of pick it on their own. But if there's somebody who's either say like really young, really undeveloped, or that I want to make sure I'm like really stepping up against like coming back from an injury or something, then I'll actually be like, okay, 6 to 12 inches, 12 inches into this inches, something like that, to make sure they don't go like too high or too low. I want to make sure that we're moving it as it goes. And then really like it's endless how high you go. It's just about being prepared for it, everything like that. So any questions on that stuff or that part of it? Cool, okay. Now, back to talking smack on textbooks. So, if you pick out, like I'm sure it's in the Essentials of Strength and Conditioning textbook right in there, for example, you will see a chart, a really famous chart of like minimal strength requirements for plyometric training. This is never explained well in any text or any class I've ever seen. Because what it shows, it's like, okay, because of the possible intensity of quick stretch and impact, and like how much force your body suddenly goes through, you need to be relatively, like you should have a pretty good strength basis before doing those types of like explosive plyometrics. In the chart, it'll mention, for example, like for lower body plyometrics, I think the minimum weight requirements that it suggests are for men, like a 2 times body weight squat. Maybe it's just 1.5 to 2 times body weight squat. For females, it's like a 1 to 1.5 times body weight squat. For bench, it's like 1 to 1.5 times body weight bench for men, or 0.75 to 1 times body weight bench for women, or something. Those are pretty high numbers, right? And then here's one of the other funny things. In this chart, when it has these pretty high numbers, it will also say, like for the upper body, or 5 clap push-ups. So it's like, okay. So somehow, doing multiple reps of a plyometric is considered a minimal requirement to start plyometrics. And it doesn't work this way. This isn't how it works. And again, like jumping is technically a plyometric. Running is technically a plyometric. All of that stuff. You had mentioned is that, so they do a terrible job of explaining the difference here, is what those numbers come from is those are like the suggested minimal strength requirements for like heavy weighted barbell squat jumps or in-depth box jumps off of 48-inch boxes. Like stuff like that, single leg in-depth box jumps with like, again, 36-inch drops. Those are the types of plyometrics they're talking about. Like the most intense kind, like that you normally only do after years of training in very short phases. But I say it's just like, it sucks because like I've never seen it. I've read 4 different editions of that textbook, and I've had 3 different like strength and conditioning professors, quote unquote, try to go over it. And none of them, the textbooks, ever actually differentiate that to people. It's just like left to find out on your own. And this is how this works. So again, so I mean, the idea that you should be like strong to do the most intense plyos is very, very key. Like a lot of people, a lot of trainers, a lot of coaches, a lot of gyms do try to ramp up the intensity of the plyos that athletes are doing way too soon, way too fast. Like they're not like, they just need to get stronger first and keep focusing on getting more explosive with what they have before they do really high intensity stuff. But the idea that they shouldn't do any type of plyos at all is completely false, again, because of the miscommunication of what a plyo movement is. Again, like it's human movement. It's basic human movement is what we're looking at and making it better and more explosive to eventually be able to do really high-end athletic. Okay, so I gave So went over types of plyos in the sense of like relaxed to then isometric to stretch cycle to impact. There's a lot of different ways you can do this. Like another way of doing it, for example, or like look at all the in-between areas, like single leg. Like going from double leg to single leg is more intense. So, just because you master a double leg exercise doesn't mean that you need to necessarily go to like a new, more intense type of plyometric. Is this an exercise they would benefit from going single leg first? And that can honestly buy you a lot of time, because it's one of those things where, again, like single leg stuff isn't automatically twice as hard. It just depends on the movement. Some of it is a little bit easier than that. Say like line hops, you're not getting a 100% increase in difficulty because you go from double leg line hops to single leg line hops. But a single leg box jump, especially, that could be more than twice as much. So I mean, that may be one of those things you might want to wait to do a single leg box jump, because it's like, that takes some work. That takes some work. So there's so many other points to think about. So that's one of the easiest ways to do it. Or again, like weight, you still want it to be explosive, but it's like, are there other ways to add resistance? So like, like body weight squat jumps, continuous squat jumps, are a form of using the stretch shortening cycle in a very natural movement. So as long as somebody doesn't have, bad mechanics, as long as somebody doesn't have like, bad joints, etc., most people can go into doing like continuous squat jumps, even if they're just not very high. But once they're ready for that, like going to the Vertimax is great, because you get the added bungee resistance. You still can, it can be just one cord. You can have the cord pretty light. You can pull the cord out tighter. You can go 2 cords. So it's good ways to make the same movement have different levels of resistance, so that you have a much broader playing field and a much wider variety of tools than just thinking you have to go from one to the other. Other thing is angles. Especially we're talking about performance. We don't want to just simply look at like one angle and only training that. This is another shortcoming from the research sports science type of world. Because again, they love their peak power. Peak power is normally expressed purely vertically. So they look at like force plates, clean pulls, and pure vertical jump. But like what about the explosive angles, having one leg in front of you, like for a running athlete, or explosive side to side angles? Those aren't things that almost ever get measured. So as a result, you get a lot of researchers, sports scientists simply telling you they don't actually there's nothing to back up that they help. That's because there's no way to accurately measure how it actually helps athletes on the field, other than the fact that every single part about it makes sense. Like if you can become more explosive from an angle of having, like one leg in front of you, hip, knee bent, one leg behind you, aka like running or jumping, then everything about how the human body works should say like, okay, we get more explosive here in these angles and these muscles, then you should be more explosive when you're running, when you're using these muscles and these exact angles on the track, or on the football field, or on the baseball field. So like everything can make sense without it being supported from research, just because they haven't been interested in or found a way to actually like bother measuring it. But I said, so that research, I really can't stand the research aspect of strength and conditioning. So get those angles in. So that means, squat, like vertical is great because it is how we're driving through the ground and getting most of our force, even when we are sprinting, etc. There's a lot of vertical force. That's why vertical jump is so big. But work lateral explosiveness, work explosiveness with one leg in front of you, work diagonal explosiveness, because all of these are angles that your athletes are going to actually perform at. It's same thing with upper body, like work explosive push-ups, but also work like slams, work backward throws, work single arm rotation stuff, even work like side to side here. Like if like all of it is just simply helping the muscle become more explosive at movements, or just combinations of movements with muscles that they're actually going to be using in their sport. So even though the measured parts are almost exclusively only one direction, like I said, train it in as many of the different directions as we can to make them actually become better athletes. And again, not just better athletes, but take everything I just said flip it to more resistant to injury at those places, same thing. I said, so like a sprinter would be like, or anyone like that, would be better prepared to resist lower body injury if they have done, like split squats, cycled split squats, step up blast offs, etc., than if they only do squat jumps. Because it's giving them more explosive angles with one leg, like with the hip flexed, the knee flexed, and extending through that and absorbing that like they will be. See you guys, like they will be than only doing vertical stuff. So that's why like it's funny because like if this is most of your experience so far with strength and conditioning, you would not believe how basic so many programs are outside of here. And basic, I mean, isn't bad. Basic isn't bad, but I guarantee that if you were to like pick 10 random high schools with weight rooms or 10 like other gyms with like athletic training programs, or again like 10 strength and conditioning research like people, that in order the researchers would be the most, the high schools would be the second most, and then followed by the gyms. But even then, at how basic things like their explosive training or like plyometrics would be. Like you'll go in like an entire month of their workouts, their plyometric will be like, we're doing 5 sets of squat jump. Like it'll be one exercise for like 3 to 5 sets. Like again, there won't be multiple angles at all. There won't be any formula. It'll just be like one exercise. That's just what we're doing. Like I said, that's just very much that exercise science, like research oriented way to do things. Is pick one and go from there. But I said, so like when we're working with real athletes, real people, that means they need to be explosive and ready for real situations, which means personally, but I'm right, like they need to be more ready, they need to be ready for like a big variety of movement to perform at their best, not just one measure, one way of doing things. So, and that makes sense in the way that, so like that drives me insane. A lot of this drives me insane. That's how a lot of people do this type of thing. Let's see. I like the thing, I mean, from here is just some small things. Like, again, going on the types, like, here, the terminology that I finally started using in a sense was like when it comes to plyometrics, if we use the word power, like power squat jump, power cycled split squat jump, whatever, it's just a way of saying peak power is my concern here per rep. So I want 1 rep at a time, reset every single time. So it's just like focus on 1 rep. And continuous is utilizing more of the actual stretch shortening cycle. So actually having it be that quick stretch, absorb, explode out. Again, it's just an easy, because that's, again, we can take one exercise and make it 2 different things just by simply having it be 1 rep at a time or continuously going into the stretch and coming back out. Volume, because they are like speed oriented and power oriented and have the potential to be relatively intense to the body, you normally want plyometric volume to be on the lower-ish side. Again, you can find information on like guideline, rep ranges, etc. I mean, once you're used to it, I don't think it's anything to necessarily go for. If you like to plan out everything super deep in advance, by all means, plan out your reps. But generally, I like sets of 5 to 10. Really explosive stuff that's a little bit heavier, I might go as low as 3 reps on things. Like really quick, like shorter, quicker, lighter exercises, I might go 10 to 15, even 20. Like line hops, speed box jumps, something like that, I might do 15. Like line hops, I might do 20, like 20. But if it's like, say, most like med ball throws, I generally go 10 to 15. I said, but in those types of ranges, and depending on how much you are doing of it, 1 to 3 sets is fine. Like I said, I have not looked at mine and counted in a few years, but generally speaking, it's no more than 100 reps and probably like 50 or something like that. Like 100, 120, like above 100 reps total of plyos in a session, if explosiveness or power is the goal, you're probably not getting it beyond that rep. So it's like, look at it and see, like, do you really need that much? It's funny because yesterday,
As well as messaging yesterday, like,
yeah, like Paul recognizing this message and called me because like Ken Lewis had it looked like 3 sets of 8 each side stepping med ball throws. So like 3 sets of 8 each side stepping chest, 3 sets of 8 each side stepping overhead. And Paul called like, hey, like this looks like a lot like for your style of programming. Just wanted to double check. Well, it turns out he had actually just needed his glasses, and 3 sets of 8 were like below it. The next yeah, it was the next slide down for like trap bar deadlift or something. And the med ball throws were like 1 set of 12 each. So that was funny. But again, like I didn't hear that and just go like, oh no, automatically that's wrong. I was like, give me like 10 seconds. I'm gonna like try to look at it myself and see, because I was like, maybe I had a reason for it. I was like, I don't know. So I was like, I don't remember. I was like, let me look and I'll check. But then I was like, huh, that's not what mine says. Like that. So but that's the thing is like, I remember back when I was an undergrad, I signed up for like a random like conditioning class at a martial arts studio that was like a plyometrics class. And you see this a lot. I don't know if it's as big these days, but you see this a lot in the fitness world. I mean, CrossFit does it all the time with like super high reps on stuff. And again, it's like, okay, if it's your condition, like, I mean, if you are conditioned or used to it, then it's cool. But the same rule applies, whether it's like a normal athlete, a regular adult getting in shape, but who wants to see what they can do, or a CrossFit athlete, doesn't matter. Like, if your focus is the explosive power, doing less reps at a time and making sure that you're more rested is still going to help you become better at being explosive power. Like, they're just super deep in the realm of like the endurance aspect of it. So that's like that's what they work on. But I remember that class that I took back then. I mean, it was like 45 minutes of straight plyos done as conditioning. You know, like it was like such a terrible idea for anything explosive. I remember that. I mean, I trained like 40 hours a week then, so I didn't care. But
did your knees end up hurting from that?
I don't remember. I was invincible, man. I was invincible. I was invincible until I was 25. 29 is when it really started falling apart. But I was invincible until 25. 40 hours, like 35 hours a week of training would do that. Yeah. So I mean, anybody else? Any questions?
What about value in impact versus soft landing? So hard landing versus soft landing.
Yeah, like it depends on how much speed you want. Kind of like if the goal is getting as much power as you can coming out of it. Okay, actually, let me take that back. That's a hard one because like I feel like what most people are actually looking for a soft landing is an anatomically correct landing. I feel like that's the real goal. But a lot of people look at it as only soft landing, and I have definitely seen some even strength coaches at like college levels focus so much on the soft landing that the athletes never get anything explosive on the other side of like the training. Like, they're definitely hurting their explosive training by only wanting a soft landing. But if by soft landing you're actually trying to get people to learn how to get and like use their anatomy correctly into land and absorb, but then also be able to then push through as fast as possible if your goal is to go into another rep, then I think it's important for that point, but just to have it be correct. But then some plyos are either so higher impact or so on the flip side, like short and quick, that I honestly never been able to get like too much of an opinion on say soft landing, like soft landings on, let's say like the speed box thing. Some people can do it almost, you don't hear anything. Some people you hear that like every single time, but I've never been able to differentiate too much between one and the other.
So something like a speed box jump where you're essentially minimizing your contact time at both points, right?
Yeah.
Versus something like a squat jump, you're obviously you don't want to go slow, but it's a lot longer contact time, right? Because you're sinking into that more.
Right. Like I've always
raising up the
wanted
hips and legs more versus a
Yeah,
speed jump.
yeah. Like I've always wanted to make sure that like the anatomy. I mean, I said the anatomy part's correct, but beyond that, I want to see the speed that I'm looking for be the emphasis more so than whether or not they're like literally making noise. So in some cases, I've been in a weight room that was like that before, and it drove me insane. It was literally just about the noise that people did like between plyos. And so like I said, I get the idea of wanting to land correctly, but it was honestly costing people, like people went an entire year without ever getting any more explosive because they never got to train explosively. Because they just couldn't figure out how to like land without making noise. And it was crazy. Yeah, so I mean, like again, the plyometric part, you get so much visual out of it. Like if they're really soft and I can see that they're still accelerating through the whole movement, that's awesome. But if as a result of like their softness and soft landings, I can actually see them kind of slowing down, then I need them pushing harder instead. Yeah, that's one that like, yeah, I've never figured out one more the way or the other. I said I'm just so oriented in like, is the movement correct and the speed part of it, other than those two things.
So on something like a multiple box jump versus a depth jump. So typically what I teach is on something like a multiple jump is you're, again, minimizing that ground contact time. Boom, boom.
Right.
Right? Whereas maybe if we're doing something like a depth jump off a 20-inch box onto a 40-inch box, we want to load that up more, or do we want to still try to minimize that ground contact time?
It depends. It's literally a chair what you want to do, to be honest. Usually, I mean, ground contact time is going to be the official. Okay, I'm really glad you went into that. So yeah, like coming quick off the ground, getting that lower ground contact time is going to be the biggest thing we're looking for. Most impact plyometrics when we want to see that quick explosive burst off of an impact. But if we do have a reason to have it be for looking more for power, then we want to see more of like a stretch go into it, because it's one of these things. It's all a spectrum. So it's not two different things actually. It just all goes like this. So if this is 0, okay, so it actually goes like this. Haha. So this line is 0 seconds and 0 like power gain, for example. And the longer we go, the ground hit like let me make sure that I'm going into this the correct way. So okay, as we do ground contact time, so I'm going to flip it like this. Okay, so this is 0. When you hit the ground, we're like at that moment we have the most amount of stored power possible. So the quicker we can go, so the shorter the ground contact time, the higher percentage of the new power we just created from the landing we get to actually use as real power, real movement. So if you're on the ground for 0.10 seconds, you might be here, but if you're on the ground for 0.2 seconds, so you'll be here. And how much, like you instantly start losing some of that extra force that you generate. So the speed off the ground is directly related to how much new force and energy you actually get to use as power, or how much just gets lost. So that's related that way. But what we're looking for, and then so with that, range of motion typically goes opposite of this, because like so to get a really fast ground contact time, you need a pretty good measure of stiffness, aka not really absorbing into the legs very much, not really stretching into the legs at all. So if you touch the ground, then you can explode up here. If you touch the ground, then you go into say like a half squat, you're going to be somewhere lower than that because you literally had to move further. It's just like for some people might be able to do like a full squat and jump faster than someone else touches the ground and goes. But that's an individual thing. For each individual person though, the further they move, the slower it's going to be automatically. But that's also where understanding that it's not all just black and white, right or wrong, and instead it's like, what do I want? What do I really want to train? Can really help you with that. So like say when I'm doing like the single, like the deep box jumps where they drop backwards off a box and jump back up, if I'm looking more, if I want more explosiveness, more like that quick explosiveness, I want like a backwards touch and go onto the box. But if I want to instead develop more like overall like lower body, like aggressive drive and power, then I'll actually then I'll want them to squat more, like drop into more of a squat and come out of that. So that, you know, your goals there can be different by the sport they're playing or the position they're playing, or it could just be different based on what you want to work on that athlete like right now, you know, like or even a weak point, like say, you know, if you want to help a sprinter with it, the touch and goes on something like that will be much more like when they're actually running a sprint. But if say you want to help somebody with like their squat, like, you know, like, and you're helping them with their weight room numbers, having them go into more of a squat position when they do it would help them develop greater, even though again their peak power would be less, it would help them develop more. But what if that squatter has an issue with lockout? Then going back to the quick contact time might help, because it'll give them the most power at the top where they're weak. So like, so much of it is based on what you want to train, why, and all that. So that's one of the things I love about stuff like plyometrics, is you can really target specific things to work with. And it's really one of these things where like, well, there's so many exercises that are already been designed by somebody, etc. Like, you can honestly, in some cases, invent relatively new things and still have it actually work out and be a plyometric, as long as you're applying the rules correctly to what you do. No. Yeah, that is good stuff. Because I'm a good guy. That was perfect ending right there.